Good evening and welcome to the Newshour Agenda. I'm Madhavdas G. Viewers, in the ongoing US-Israel and Iran war, Donald Trump has announced a 5-day pause in military operations against Iran. He stated that the US and Tehran have been in talks over the last 2 days, which have been constructive, and that these discussions will continue over the next week. As a result, all strikes on Iran's power plants and energy infrastructure have been temporarily paused. Listen in.
What about the Strait of Hormuz? Who's going to be in control of that?
That'll be opened very soon if this works.
How soon? And who's in control of it? Will Iran still be able to control the flow of oil?
Be jointly controlled.
By whom?
Maybe me. Maybe me.
You want the United States to be in
Me
control
and the Ayatollah, whoever the Ayatollah is, whoever the next Ayatollah. We have had very, very strong talks. We'll see where they lead. We have major points of agreement. I would say almost all points of agreement. Perhaps that hasn't been conveyed. The communication, as you know, has been blown to pieces. They're unable to talk to each other. But we've had very strong talks. Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner had them. They went, I would say, perfectly. I would say that if they carry through with that, it'll end that problem, that conflict, and I think it'll end it very, very substantially.
Just after Trump halted strikes, crude oil prices, which had surged relentlessly since the start of the war, plunged sharply. The Brent as well fell more than 8% from the previous day's close, reflecting relief in global markets. However, this so-called pause comes just hours before his 48-hour ultimatum to Iran was set to expire. Earlier, Trump had warned Iran that if the Strait of Hormuz remained closed, he would target and destroy Iran's power plants and energy infrastructure. This warning sent shockwaves across the world and raised fears of a possible nuclear escalation in the ongoing conflict. All right, we have more breaking news coming in at the moment. The Iranian speaker has denied any talks with the US, calling claims of negotiations fake news and describing them as a bid by the US to stabilize financial and oil markets. Let's quickly get in Mayank on that note. Mayank, this is very interesting to see that after the President of the United States has put out that statement, and there are, of course, those who are saying now that this is nothing but an attempt to influence the markets, and that's because clearly it's the beginning of a week.
Let's begin by bringing out certain facts from ground here from Tel Aviv. You know, there had been relatively the calmest day we have seen here since we arrived to this place, and there was only one emergency siren which was rung here, and in 3 cities, which was Dimona, Rishon LeZion and Tel Aviv. So that is one of the facts which we need to bring out from here. Even if the negotiations have not taken place, it is a very positive thing. The second point we need to talk about is that while entire leadership, top leadership of Iran has been knocked off. So in that case, is it also a sort of a plant or a communication wherein to pacify the domestic audience? That is the second point in that case. And third point, have the aims and goals of the entire operation, whether from Israel or the US, or have they been achieved? And if not achieved, that means there is a midpoint there, and people have found out a kind of a sort of negotiating task between all 3 nations, which will help them out together. So there has to be some kind of a talk which is going on, even if it is denied from Iran's side.
So is the peace on ground in Israel any kind of indication of what actually the intentions are from the side of Iran, and of course the overtures from the side of US? For the moment, Iran is denying these charges or denying these claims, but let's see what happens from tomorrow onwards. Let's quickly open this up, and before I take it across to our guests, explain what really has been happening over the last few days. And of course, one of the aspects, apart from oil prices, apart from, of course, the military hits that US and Israel have taken, as well as, of course, civilian losses that and, of course, infrastructure damage that Israel has faced, is, of course, the question over nuclear sites being hit. What are we talking about? We're talking about the Natanz nuclear facility, which has been targeted twice so far. This is, of course, in Iran. It has been, of course, seen that the entrance buildings were damaged, and also no increase in off-site radiation that has been reported either. There's also the Bushehr nuclear power plant, where the structure is about 350 meters from the reactor which has been hit. No radiation leak that has been reported here either from the Bushehr nuclear plant that has been reported as well. Let's also take this across. These are 2 areas. In fact, over the last few days, we've seen hits at Natanz and also at Dimona, where Iran has retaliated. So Dimona in Israel, also another region which has been hit, raising fears about whether this is going to lead to some kind of a nuclear escalation if there is indeed radiation leaks and damages that are incurred as a result of these strikes. Debate coming up on the other side.
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 1 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
Let's take this across to our guest. Joining us, Lieutenant Raj Shukla is with us, defense expert. He's a former army commander as well. Dr. Zaki Zaidi is a Middle East analyst with us. We have Peter Kuznick, author and professor of history and director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at the American University. We have John Rosomando, geopolitical and national security strategist, joining us. Jeremy Zakharov is a former vice director general of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and former Israel ambassador to Germany. With us also is Aaron Eaton, mayor, who's an attorney and a Middle East expert. Let me start first and foremost with John Rosomando. John Rosomando, Iran completely denies this possibility of a talk that has taken place or any kind of agreement. They say this is nothing but a blatant attempt at influencing the markets at the start of a trading day, at the start of a fresh week. Your response to the official responses coming in from the speaker and other entities from Iran?
It's a cover-up because right now Ghalibaf, the speaker in question, is having discussions with the Trump administration over control of the Strait of Hormuz. So, it's kind of like the old Wizard of Oz. Don't ignore the guy behind the curtain, because currently the Islamic Republic sees that the United States is planning on seizing several islands and is looking for a decent way out. One of their talks is returning 3 islands that were taken by the Shah in the 1970s back to UAE sovereignty.
All right, let's quickly get a quick response from Peter Kuznick. Peter Kuznick, do you agree with this contention? Why is Iran denying this if actually talks have taken place? And in fact, there are some other handles that indicate that there was an outreach mechanism and there were several countries which have been specifically named which are involved in this outreach between the two countries, mediating between the two countries. How are you looking at this, Peter Kuznick?
I'm hoping that there's the discussions going on. But the fact that Donald Trump says there are these discussions does not make me any more confident that they're really occurring. The parliamentary speaker, Ghalibaf, has denied it. So we've got the Iranians and you've got the Trump regime. I don't know which one you believe. Trump, we know, lies constantly. He's lied about this war from the first time he opened his mouth about why we were doing it. And so we don't know what to make of anything Trump says. But we need outside intervention to force an end to this, because the ladder of escalation that's going on gets more and more ominous, and the effects of it are potentially catastrophic. If Trump carried out those attacks that he was threatening, the whole region would be a whole new level of chaos and destruction. So Trump is under a lot of pressure. The war is very, very unpopular here in the United States. And it's also, there's a lot of fissures in his own base. So we could see why Trump might want to have an off-ramp at this point. But he's not going to be able to do it and credibly claim victory, because this is not a victory for anybody.
Right. Let me bring in fact, Aaron Eaton, Mayor, as well. Aaron Eaton, Mayor, what do you think, or what do you assess is the reason for this rethink on part of Trump? Because this is clearly different from the kind of rhetoric we've seen over the last few days, saying that we'll punish them, we'll pulverize them, so on and so forth. I'm just paraphrasing, not the exact quotes, but that's really the effect of what we've heard coming in from the United States. Today, we're talking about reconciliation, we're talking about some kind of discussion taking place. Is it the high prices and the global economic impact? Is it the fact that there have been certain losses that U.S. military, Navy, so on and so forth have suffered? Or is it diplomatic pressure that's building up from the Gulf countries and partners such as EU as well?
I actually don't believe it's any of those. We have seen this rhetoric from President Trump before. In fact, I would look to just about a month ago, We heard a very, very similar dynamic. There was a deadline, but we've had positive negotiations. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner have been very successful over there, and we anticipate developments, right? That was February. And what happened shortly thereafter? That's when this war broke out. So I don't believe that we should simply accept that this is a real change. Rather, it's a resumption of negotiations of a sort. Now, the end result is really the question. Because again, the last time we went through this, the next step was to take out the vast majority of the Iranian regime's high command. So if I were on the other side, that would be the part I would be concerned about.
No, but what's the off-ramp then? What is it that President Trump will be able to tell the American people as to why he waged this war for 3 weeks, spending a considerable amount of resources, and that too in an election year?
Well, I would say all you have to do is look at what Iran has done in response. Okay, they have revealed that they have ballistic missiles that can strike thousands of miles away and have no problem using them. They have revealed that they have no problem using cluster bombs, which are illegal. They have no problem shelling deliberately civilian areas, specifically in Israel and in Arab countries. They have shown all of these things that made them an enduring threat. They've revealed their hand at this point. A real reason for changing course to some degree at this point doesn't lie within Iran. It doesn't rely in some perceptions of in the media. It relies on the fact that China and Russia are now starting to take notice.
Are you saying the United States didn't know all of this? You didn't know about the nuclear, the arsenal. You've been claiming they have nuclear bombs. You didn't know about the ICBMs or their strike capabilities, or the fact that they could hit their neighboring states. I'm sure the U.S. intelligence would have known all of this. Why is this such a big revelation?
Well, it's not a revelation. That's the thing. We knew it. But if you looked at, say, February 28th, if you looked at March 1st, you still had people coming out and saying, well, how do we know they really have all of this? How do we know that they would use this? How do we know? Well, we know. On the inside, we already knew. Now the general public can see it for themselves. Okay. That's been the biggest reveal.
Let me bring in Lieutenant General Raj Shukla on that. Raj Shukla, I find that a little hard to believe. You know, the fact that Iran has its own nuclear capabilities is something that is contested, and that's, of course, for the US, etc., to explain as to why they've struck the various nuclear facilities. But the point that they've been building up their arsenal of missiles, so on and so forth, for the last several decades, the fact that they have huge number of drones, all of this is information that we've been debating from the first day of the war. So what is it that, you know, President Trump will be able to explain, especially at a time when there are oil prices going up in the United States as well, as to the reason for waging this war in the first place? Because if you look at the approval ratings, if you look at whether Americans really want the war, an overwhelming majority don't.
You know, I heard the statement of Mr. Trump in some detail, and also with news coming out from many other outlets. Something is definitely afoot. I mean, there is news of Mr. Vance heading these negotiations. Egypt, Turkey are being named. Islamabad is a possible destination. And Mr. Trump was sounding very confident. And he also said that, you know, there was somebody very senior in the administration that is being spoken to, and he didn't want to name him because of a threat to his life. Now, if this person is Mr. X, have the Americans found a Delcy Rodriguez? Is this Mr. X speaking on behalf of Mr. Mushtaba? If so, then why the strong denials? Is the regime splitting? I mean, that seems to be the indication, though I have my doubts. Or is Mr. X speaking on behalf of the regime? Now, these are some of the questions which are unanswered, but something seems to be afoot. The second point I'd like to make is that while Trump is putting on a brave face, he, I think, has also realized the limits of American military power. While they have done a lot of battering, the fact of the matter, in my view, remains that they may control the skies, but Iran controls the strait. And at this point, I don't think there are very many military options to reopen Hormuz.
Okay.
And with all the other bad news coming in, perhaps Mr. Trump is looking for an off-ramp.
Okay.
What has surprised the Americans is the Iranian resilience. And the last point I'd like to make is this.
Sure.
You know, Mr. Trump was sounding very confident on having reached a 15-point agreement, something about, you know, the highly enriched uranium, so on and so forth. I'm even prepared to believe that the Iranians will give a lot on the on the nuclear weapons. But this other bit that they will forsake their missiles, which the Israelis are claiming and the Americans are claiming, I mean, that sounds, quite obnoxious. Because why will the Israelis concede or give up on their missile framework, the only thing that has come to their rescue? So the terms of agreement seem to be, pretty unbelievable to me. But something is definitely afoot. And Mr. Trump also claims that it is the Iranians who reached out and not him.
All right. Let me bring in fact, Jeremy Zakharov on that note. Jeremy Zakharov, you heard the Lieutenant General. He says something's afoot, but the arguments being put forth are not making sense. And I just want to add, in context of what we saw a few days ago, nuclear sites being hit on both sides, etc. Joe Kent, who's the former director of the National Counterterrorism Center, said that the first step in this de-escalation must be restraining Israelis. The question then that exists is that the inherent contradictions, of course, US and Israel have a lot in common, but can the contradictions between the two countries, for instance, if Israel goes ahead and strikes Iran in the midst of these talks, could that further derail the talks and any potential at arriving at peace?
Well, just as a matter of fact, my understanding is that American and Israeli military operations are continuing, but they're just being more adjusted to not attacking infrastructural sites. It's still very unclear, as one of the previous speakers said. The President Trump was quite specific in terms of 15 points, getting out all the nuclear materials, stopping any chance of Iran getting to a nuclear weapon. And of course, obviously, we'll have to see what the details are of such an agreement emerging. And it does seem that the Egyptians, the Pakistanis, and the Turks were involved in this discussion, and there could be negotiations starting up in Islamabad. And I would say, as an Israeli, I have thought for a number of days now that it's vital to have a diplomatic option on the table. It's still not clear with whom the president is talking, and as one of the previous speakers said, Mr. Kalibaf denied any of this, but this could also be a matter of maneuvering, because he needs, maybe him or somebody else, maybe the president, Kazakhstan, needs to prepare their people for some sort of deal. But in any event, I think there's still a way to go till we understand exactly what's going on.
All right. There's some media reports coming in. I want to quickly put out that information, and this is big breaking development if this is indeed true. There are US media reports that the IRGC, in response to the regional mediation efforts, has demanded guarantees that the war wouldn't restart, an end to Israel's strikes on Hezbollah, the closure of US bases in the Gulf, and compensation for its losses. Let me quickly bring in fact, Zaki Zaidi. Zaki Zaidi, does this seem to be likely to be part of the wish list on part of the IRGC, and how much of this is practically possible?
Yes, definitely. This has been claimed because Lebanon is another front for Iran and Israel. And, Israel has claimed that Hezbollah is its proxy. And whether it was Mr. late, the security chief Larjani, or whether it's Mr. Kalibaf, they have multiple times stated that they have to pay until unless we are compensated that whatever material damage has been caused, along with like the US bases should go from the Gulf states which are surrounding the Iran and from where the attacks are taking place. This is a minimal condition because they want to create such a condition that Israel and US do not kind of repeat that war, regroup, re-prepare and attack again. They want to change the condition. They want to increase the deterrence. And I do not think what Trump is just kind of a desperate for an off-ramp, as other guests mentioned that this war is extremely unpopular, and Trump knows that not everything can be achieved by military operations, be it like the opening of Strait of Hormuz or his initial objective of regime change. He climbed down from regime change to now operating the Strait of Hormuz with Iran.
Okay.
So Israel has been consistent in its objective. Its objective has been the regime collapse, regime decapitation. But US because like many states are involved, other states are involved. So their goal post is changing.
Okay.
First, because of oil or
yes, the goalposts have been changing. I think that's a fair observation to make because it is all on record. And let me bring in John Rosamando on that. John, the point is this. The goalpost has shifted multiple times over the last 3 weeks. I don't think there's any disputing that. All those statements are out in the open. But the question, the moot question at this point of time when negotiations are underway is that A, what will the off-ramp be? What will the explanation be? And also the question of if President Trump wants to, along with Iran, monitor or control the Strait of Hormuz, what is it that they will give in return for that? Because Iran appears to be asking for a lot, including the closure of US military bases in the Gulf countries.
Well, all I have to say is that when it comes to President Trump, he's been a negotiator for decades who's tried to bewilder the people on the other side of the table so they don't know what his goal is. His end goal here is to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which is a tactical goal.
Okay, I believe President Trump is speaking. Let's cut across live to that, please.
Eliminated their Air Force. We eliminated all of their air defense, everything. We eliminated everything there is to eliminate, and we eliminated them. We eliminated their leaders. We had the first set of leaders. They're gone. Then they met, 88 people met. And it's sad. I mean, it's sad they couldn't have made a deal. We could have made a deal with them a long time ago. Then the second set, 88 people met to pick a new leader. And they're now extinguished. And then they're meeting again. But now nobody wants to be the leader. It's one of the few political jobs that nobody wants anywhere in the world. Nobody wants it. It's a very dangerous job. My job is dangerous too, but their job is worse. In other words, we're systematically dismantling the regime's ability to threaten America. They're not threatening us anymore. As Commander-in-Chief, it's my sacred responsibility to protect our country from all threats. For decades, Iran refused every opportunity to renounce its nuclear ambitions, and in recent months, its own negotiators bragged to our representatives about having enough material to make nuclear weapons. And that was supposed to deter me, but it didn't deter. It made me more anxious, and it just made it much more important. This mission that we're all on together was much more important, and we did it quicker. Iran's missile capabilities were also growing so fast that it would soon have become virtually impossible to stop them. Once they have a missile, once they have what they were building was incredible. And you got a little glimpse of it by the fact that when they came out, they started shooting all of their neighbors. Their neighbors weren't fighting with them. They were getting along okay with their neighbors. And I was surprised. Everybody was surprised. And it actually worked in reverse because their neighbors then turned against them. Now Iran has one more opportunity to end its threats to America and her allies, and we hope they take it. Either way, America and the entire world will soon be much safer and will be a much more secure planet. In addition to all of this, we're working on so many different things. You know, our economy was fantastic. We had a Dow at 50,000. They say it couldn't happen in 4 years. It wouldn't happen during my term. But if I got anywhere close, it would be a great success. Well, in my first year, we hit 50,000. And with the S&P, they said, even more difficult. They said it would be impossible to hit.
All right, so you heard there President Trump talking about what really has transpired and, of course, what the future roadmap ahead is. Peter Cushing, I'd like you to respond to what President Trump just said there. He's made an interesting point about how they not just removed the first regime, but also those who had gathered. He went and removed all of them as well. The big question is that if they're going to continue to remove regime after regime, who are they going to talk to? Who are they talking to at this point of time is also not clear. And perhaps that's why there are so many denials coming. Nobody wants to perhaps be seen as engaging with the regime. Is that what's really happening? What sense can we make of these statements?
You can't make any sense out of anything Trump says because he lies all the time. It's often said that the first casualty of war is truth. Well, Trump had destroyed the truth long before we went to war. And he's repeating his lies. It says Iran refused to renounce its nuclear ambitions.
Right.
Iran has had fatwa against nuclear weapons since 2003. They've renounced it repeatedly. The CIA says that they gave up their nuclear weapons program in 2003. They had a deal, the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal in 2015, based on which Iran shipped out its enriched uranium and was enriching to 3.67%. They were at least a year away from a breakout if they wanted one. And then Trump kills the Ayatollah who has the fatwa, or Israel and Trump do together. And then now I don't know what the younger Khamenei thinks about nuclear weapons, but the world is commenting that given how unhinged and Trump is with his kidnapping of the Maduros, with his threatening to go to war with the Greenland, with Colombia, with Panama, with Nigeria, bombing 7 countries his first year back in office. And now this, people are saying, and I don't want to see this, that the only defense anybody has against being overthrown by the United States is to have nuclear weapons. That's what North Korea said about Saddam in 2003. They said the same thing about Libya in 2011. Okay. That would be the worst possible outcome. And if Iran did develop a nuclear weapon, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Turkey, Egypt would all go nuclear. Nobody wants to see Iran get a nuclear weapon, but they were far away from it till Trump blew things up. And, so it's the opposite of what he says. And their missiles, he talked about their missiles. He said that Iran was very close to having intercontinental ballistic missiles that could strike the United States. The Defense Intelligence Agency recently reported that Iran was 10 years away from that, if they even wanted to have that kind of program. And that Tulsi Gabbard has said this and knows this. So, you can't believe anything Trump says.
Okay, let Aaron answer that. Aaron, Peter Kuznick is of the view that you can't believe anything that Trump says. A lot of the points that have been made in public have been negated publicly as well. And also it's a fact that, when it comes to whether what Tulsi Gabbard has said, whether it comes to 2003, when we saw the invasion in Iraq as well, weapons of mass destruction, is it a similar thing that we are seeing happen once again as far as Iran is concerned? That's a question that many are asking.
I think the answer is no. I think there is a calculated level of disinformation that's being spread. And again, go back just to last month. You can see a similar dynamic. So I would not read everything at face value, especially with the administration. Whether you like the administration or not, you should know that face value is not the way to go. In terms of what it should mean, remember the key words in what the president just said was systematic dismantling of the regime, right? The word systematic dismantling was a very, very important part of this. That is what led us to where we are today. And that is the part that can't be allowed to just simply dissipate. For all the talk of the war being unpopular, which is disputable, certainly within the United States, there's a pretty big split. There needs to be a long-term strategy. It's not about specifics of where exactly they were in their nuclear program, which was very advanced. The JCPOA, it did not work. They were advancing. It was a very big concern to everybody in the region. And it's a mistake to believe that simply because there may be some additional disinformation that there's no plan and that this is a repeat of prior deliberate misinformation to our own people.
General Shukla, I'd like you to come in on this nuclear question. How much of this is hype? How much of this is reality? Because clearly the entire war appears to have been based on the fact about whether Iran is going nuclear. And there are many who believe that that is just a false bogey, that there's no such thing that's actually happening. Your view on this, Lieutenant General?
Let's start from the obliteration claim that Trump made last year. Despite that claim, it now turns out that they had about 440 kgs of highly enriched uranium, which is 60%, and I'm told from 60 to 90%, it is 2 to 4 weeks, so pretty soon. Then in that famous Pickaxe Mountain, they had begun creating the centrifuges and all the stuff for nuclear weapons, and this time so deep so as to keep it out of a B-2 strike. So the obliteration was really not a truth, or it was a half-truth or a wrong assessment, because the whole nuclear weapon program seemed to have got going again. But the real point, I think, is this, that, what has actually happened, that the conflict has stalemated. This next thing that Mr. Trump is threatening about the power grid and all.
All right, I'm sorry I'm interrupting you there, Jeff General, but there's some breaking updates coming in. At the same briefing that we cut into earlier, now President Trump has said that we have a very good negotiation that we are having with Iran, and they've agreed to give up their nuclear weapons. Big development coming in, because this is coming in from the horse's mouth, from President Trump himself. Let's listen into that particular briefing.
Under any circumstances, you have to call it the Save America Act, because everybody knows what that is. So they want funding taken away from the ICE patriots who are responsible for getting rid of the criminals that Sleepy Joe Biden, the worst president in the history of our country, and his gang of thugs in the White House. You talk about weaponization, they weaponized everybody. When when Pam looks at somebody, oh, it's weaponization. They've indicted me. What they've done to me and everybody else, it's a disgrace. They're the weaponizers. And what they've done to people, can never let that happen again. We can never let them get away with it again. They are the greatest weaponizers. Fortunately, it didn't work, because here I am with you. So it didn't work out too well. Didn't work out too well. But they want to have people come into our country. And so many of these people are murderers. They're drug dealers. They're the worst criminals anywhere in the world. They want them in our country. They don't want them to come out. They make it almost impossible, but we get them out anyway. They should have never been allowed to enter our sacred ground. These people should have never. They came from all over the world. They came from all over. They came from the Congo in Africa. They came from all over South America.
All right, quick response, in fact, from our guests on this. In fact, how do you like to respond to that? Iran has agreed, Dr. Zaki Zaidi, that's the statement coming in from President Trump. Iran has agreed to actually give up their nuclear program and nuclear weapons. And he says the talks are going very well.
I think this is either a bluff or some miscommunication, because how Iran will say, first of all, Iran never claimed that it has a nuclear weapon, okay? And the whole point being dragged was that Iran wants to have a peaceful nuclear program, for energy and civilian purposes. And Iran, what wanted it was like a dignified, because, it did not want to surrender under someone's threat or pressure. Okay, they didn't want nuclear weapons either. So I don't understand where this statement is coming from.
Okay.
They're just absolutely lying.
Jeremy Zakharov, would you like to respond to that? Is President Trump lying, as the previous speaker suggests, or is there some truth that Iran has agreed to that it won't have a nuclear weapon? Perhaps speaking prospectively.
Look, I prefer not to get into the credibility of President Trump, but I think we should talk about the credibility of Iran. And Iran does have a very energetic program of enriching uranium. And it's not just about 450 kilos of uranium enriched to 60%. You also have 8,500 kilos enriched to 3.67% and another 1,000 kilos enriched to 20%. This is the only country that is member of the NPT that is enriching to 60%. So I think, first of all, we should look at the credibility of Iran. And if Trump can have a diplomatic deal that removes that material and also is able to have very intrusive inspections of the remaining Iranian facilities and continued inspection and monitoring by the IAEA, then I think this would be a very...
There's a breaking update coming. I just quickly want to update our viewers. There's a spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China who's put out a social media post saying the conflict in the Middle East is still spreading and spilling over. If the conflict continues to expand and the situation again escalates, the whole region will be plunged into chaos. Force will only lead to a vicious cycle, and China strongly calls on parties in the conflict to immediately stop military operations, return to dialogue and negotiation, not continue the war. That should not have happened. So interesting comment coming in there, that force will only lead to a vicious cycle. We'll have to leave it over there. Lieutenant General Raj Shukla, Dr. Zaki Zaidi, Peter Kuznick, Dr. John Rosamando, Jeremy Zakharov and Aaron Eaton Mayer. Thanks so much for joining us this evening.